right. That used to make me so nervous. When they tell me my stomach would just get a knot. I guess I've got used to it in 2 years. I don't know about that. But anyway, we are in Ezekiel. We're still in chapter 1. And if you have not got this book, I want to recommend it to you again. I can't get rid of my gum yet. I'll get rid of it in a minute. If you haven't got this book yet, I would recommend it. It's a pretty easy to follow, and it gives a good summation of what we're doing. If you remember last week, we did talk about definitely we did talk about the vision that that Ezekiel saw. Does anybody remember our vocabulary word for last week? Theophany. And who can remembers what theophany is? A vision of God. A vision of God. And that's going to be a little more explained to us tonight. We started out, and the first thing that he saw was the windstorm that in verse 4 of chapter 1. Then we were introduced to the 4 living creatures that are difficult for all of us to kind of wrap our head around. Had 4 faces, and we talked about their significance in their bodies and what they look like. Tonight, we're going to start in the 15th verse of chapter 1 of Ezekiel. Now, I want to kind of preface tonight by saying that we are going to stop, and I'll tell you the reason. We're going to stop, if not before, we're going to stop at verse 7 in chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is kind of short. It's only got like just maybe 10 or 12 verses in it. 10 verses. So we're going to stop at verse 7. And the reason we're stopping there is from the 8th verse in chapter 2 all the way down to the rest of all of chapter 3 that's kind of the call, the response, I guess I should say, of Ezekiel. And I don't want to get into that without being able to finish it. You understand? So we're gonna. My plan tonight is to start at verse 15 and work through chapter 2 to verse 7, so that we can get those. We can get that done. All right. Anybody have any questions or anything from last week? Any thoughts that maybe you went home and studied? I'll be the teacher. You went home and studied and thought you'd bring back valuable information. Like I said, we're in verse 15, so I want to read verse 15 through 21, and that's kind of where we're going to start at, okay? Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 15 says, "Now, as I looked at the living creatures, behold, a wheel was on the earth beside each living creature with its 4 faces. The appearance of the wheel and their workings was like the color of beryl, and all 4 of the same likeness. The appearance of their workings was, as it were, a wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they moved, they went toward any one of the 4 directions. They did not turn aside when they went. As for their rims, they were so high, they were awesome, and their rims were full of eyes, all around the 4 of them. When the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. And when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go, they went, because there the Spirit went. And the wheels were lifted together with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When those went, these went. When those stood, these stood. And when those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up together with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels." Okay? And this is an interesting analogy. Now, I want to say this. I believe that whenever what Ezekiel is describing to us is literally what he saw. Okay? I don't think these wheels are symbolic of anything. The one thing that I think is symbolic about this description are the eyes on the rims, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But it's Ezekiel really breaks it down from what he sees first. Now, and to understand kind of where we're going with this, he's seeing God on the throne, but he starts at the bottom and he works his way up. All right, so he sees this on the bottom, and he saw those four creatures. How are the creatures touching each other? Do you remember? With their wings. What's that remind us of? We talked about it last week. What does it remind us of whenever the wings touch? The Holy of Holies. Ark of the Covenant has cherubims on it, and their wings touch as well. So their wings touch. All right, how many sets of wings do they have? Do y'all remember? 6 wings, 3 sets. Okay? So, and now we get to the base, and it calls them a wheel. And it says that there's like a wheel within a wheel. And like I said, I believe that Ezekiel is telling us literally what he sees. However, I think the reason he is seeing this is symbolic of how God works. Okay? Because Ezekiel says it, that there in verse, it's kind of like reading Dr. Seuss in a way, when it says, and these, and those, and these, and those. I was kind of like, okay. But I say that they move together. Okay? If the beast want to move, the wheel moves. Did you catch what makes the creatures and the wheel move? The Spirit. The Spirit does it. And I love that very last line. I think it was the last line. For the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And this is actually the Spirit of God. They are moving in concert with each other. They're not separate. They're moving in concert, in coordination with each other. So let's talk a little bit about verses 15 through 21. All right. There's 4 of them, but each one has 4 faces. Where are you at? Oh, yes. Now mine says the Spirit of the living creatures. Yours does not have an S? What version you got? Okay. All right. I've got New King James. So. I believe my understanding is yes. That they're talking because these are actually moving the throne of God. They have to work in concert with each other. So that's my understanding anyway. Yeah, no, you're perfectly fine. All right. So the wheels gave mobility to the chariot throne of God. God appears to Ezekiel in imagery of movement and action that presented him as both transcendent and immanent. So it's important that whenever we look at what the imagery that God does give Ezekiel and the way Ezekiel describes to us, understand, let me say this one more time. I believe that Ezekiel is literally seeing these things, but they do mean, they are representative of God and how He is and who He is and what He is to the people. And I think that'll become more clear as we talk through this. So God is wanting Ezekiel to see that he is both transcendent and immanent. He is present, he is there, and we're going to get into the omnipresence and the omnipotent and all that kind of stuff in a few minutes. He is affirming the presence of God. Now, think back again. Why is it so important that God reveal himself to be present to Ezekiel? Why is that? Why do you think that's important? Think about where Ezekiel is. Okay, Is Ezekiel home? He's in exile. He's in Babylon. Now, and we can identify with Babylon because Babylon is almost, that's what they call the city before Jesus returns, the sin city, Babylon. So Ezekiel is in a place to where, we all get there sometimes whenever we go through trials and tribulations and we're in bondage. We get to that place where we really don't know maybe which way's up. So the reality of what God is showing Ezekiel is very purposeful. And every detail is important because it shows how present God is in the situation. Now, I don't want to say that just yet. So God is revealing His presence. The wheels that Ezekiel saw were the lowest part of the chariot throne and sat on the ground below the cherubim. Each wheel was actually two in one, which one apparently set inside the other at right angles. Okay, so you've got like a cross with one wheel going this way and one wheel going this way. So when you think about that, and this we talked a little bit about this last time. It went in any direction, and when you think about each of these beasts having four faces, they never faced backwards. So let that speak to your spirit for just a minute. It's really nice to me, and it's comforting to me to know that my God is not caught off guard, and nothing ever sneaks up behind Him. Okay? Even with all the craziness that happens, even when I make foolish mistakes, God is aware of what's going on. He's aware, and it didn't catch Him off guard. And wherever the Spirit moves, He goes in that direction, and He's never turning around going backwards. Never. To me, that's pretty powerful. The Spirit gave direction to the wheels through direct knowledge and access to the will of God. Now, in this commentary, he capitalizes the Spirit. So this is representative of the Holy Spirit that we understand today. Now, when did the Holy Spirit come? To everybody. On Pentecost. In Acts. After Jesus' resurrection. Jesus even said, when I go away, I'll send a comforter. Okay, He said that. But in the Old Testament, that same Spirit is present with Ezekiel. Now, it's not identified as the comforter. But if it's the same Spirit, guess what it's got to be? It's got to be the comforter. It's got to be comforting. It's got to be assuring. And whatever the Spirit wills is where the throne goes. My mind cannot understand the love that God has for me and the love that we're shown that He has for Ezekiel just by the fact that he is moving in whatever direction he needs to be moved in. And it's not that he's being reactive. He's being proactive. He's moving ahead of the situation to create whatever needs to be, to formulate whatever needs to be done. He's not reacting to something he didn't know about. And I think it's important that we understand that God knew exactly where his people were. He knew exactly where Ezekiel was. He knew the situation. He was not caught off guard, and he was not trying to catch up and play from behind. He was there before. And he called Ezekiel to be there, and we'll get into what he tells Ezekiel here in just a little bit. Now, I don't know about y'all, but that's a lot for my mind to take in. I can almost say, okay, y'all, think on that for a week, and we'll see on next week. But we're not going to do that. It's important for us to understand the importance of how God is present. I can't say that enough. So, the Spirit gave direction to the wheels through the direct knowledge and access to the will of God. It says verse 21 is a recap of verse 19 and 20 and forms a conclusion to the section emphasizing the unity and coordination between the cherubs, the wheels, the Spirit, and the throne chariot. Now, have y'all ever tried to move something with lots of moving parts? Have y'all ever seen that movie, Home Alone? And I love it when the guy, he goes to that, it's Home Alone 2, and he goes to that house and he's trying to get up, he fell down, he's in the first floor, and he's trying to build up the second floor, and he's got chairs stacked everywhere. And he puts his hand on it, the whole thing shakes. That's what happens when we get in control of things. You know, we try to build something to get us up somewhere, and it's shaky. But God's will and God's Spirit takes care of everything, and it moves in coordination and unity. You might remember from whenever we looked at, we read that book, Future Church, one of the most powerful things about a church is when it's in unity. When a family's in unity, when a church is in unity, when a community is in unity, it's amazing what God can do. Here we get a visual image from Ezekiel of how God works things out, how it's all moving together in coordination and unity. It says, Ezekiel's imagery vividly represents the basic characteristics of the divine nature. Yahweh was seated above the cherubim on his throne chariot as the Lord of creation. The mobility of the wheels suggests the omnipresence of God. The eyes is omniscience, and the elevated position is omnipotent. Okay? So let's back though, because that's some big omni word. All right? So what does it mean? What does it mean for something to be omnipresent? Everywhere. All right? Literally, and I can't say that yet. I'm not there yet. Literally, we can say that God is present here tonight, and He's present at every church that's having Bible study. He's present in homes that are in trouble, that are praying and asking for His help. He is omnipresent. He is everywhere. Even if Angie wants to go watch us online, He'll still be with Angie at her house. See? I know, isn't it great? All right? He's omnipresent. Now, a lot of times in our own minds, we get to this thing to where God can only do things in certain places. And that's really not true. God is omnipresent. He's present everywhere. He's always there. What about omniscient? What does it mean to be omniscient? Think about what's represented. What did I say it was represented by that? It's the eyes. All-seeing and all-knowing. Okay, you see, you know, you see. So it's those two parts. So yeah, He knows everything. So now it's important, and we'll talk a little bit about this later. A lot of the Israelites believed that because they were not in their homeland, that God would not work for them. That since they were in bondage, they were cast out, and God didn't care about them anymore, for lack of a better term. This realization to Ezekiel shows He is present even in bondage. He is present even in captivity. He is present even in Sin City. Let that sink in just a minute. He's present. He's there. And He's just as strong. He still knows everything that He knew when He was in heaven, just like He does on earth. Where His location does not change His effectiveness or His power. He is omniscient. He is all-knowing. He is all-seeing. He knows. And then the final one that we have there is omnipotent, or omnipotent is what it says. What does it mean to be omnipotent? If you're omnipotent, all powerful. Does that sum it up? Pretty well. You could get in some tangents if you wanted to. There's nobody that's stronger than He is. There's nothing that can defeat Him. There's nothing. get on the message a little bit. He is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, and the reason he's the Lord of Lords and King of Kings is because of these three things. He is omniscient, he is omnipresent, and he is omnipotent. Isn't it great to serve a God like that? Isn't it great? All right. So then we've made it. We've identified the beast. We've identified how it moves, and now in verse 22, we start talking. And the scripture in the commentary uses NIV, but I'm going to continue reading out of the New King James. So if I use some of the terminology, if I don't go back and forth exactly right, you just call me out and I'll explain it to you, okay? But we're going to read verse 22 through 27. This is going to get us almost to the chapter. So verse 22 says, "The likeness of the firmament above the heads of the living creatures was like the color of an awesome crystal." Before I read any more, where have you heard the word firmament before? Genesis. What happened there? What happened in Genesis? Creation. What did he call a firmament? Remember? What? The sky. Heavens. The heavens. And the King James or the NIV calls that an expanse. So that's what he's describing here, okay? The likeness of the firmament above the heads of the creatures was like the color of an awesome crystal, stretched out over their heads. And under the firmament, their wings spread out straight, one toward each other. Each one had two, which covered one side, and each one had two, which covered the other side of the body. When they went, they heard the noise of their wings. This gives me chills. Like the noise of many waters. Like the voice of the Almighty. A tumult like the noise of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. A voice came from above the firmament that was over their heads. Whenever they stood, they let down their wings. And above the firmament over their head was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire stone. On the likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it. Also, from the appearance of his waist and upward, I saw, as it were, the color of amber, with the appearance of fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his waist and downward, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire with brightness all around. So what is Ezekiel seeing? It's all right. That's our intermission. What's he seeing? When Ezekiel, he sees all this, and then he sees the throne. Is the throne empty? No. No, it's not. I want to read from the NIV just to give you a little bit of clear picture, because the language is a little bit easier to understand. So I want you to look in, just listen. If you want to kind of read on with me, I'm going to start in verse 26 again. It says, "Above the expanse, which was that firmament, over their heads was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him." Does that give you a picture? All right. Yeah, I don't want to say that just yet, but here's what I want you to understand. Yes, he is seeing Jesus, God. Everything that I've been preaching to you over the last few weeks about how so many times we keep God in the Old Testament and Jesus in the New Testament together here. That's what Ezekiel sees. That's what he sees, the figure of a man. He doesn't see an old man. He doesn't see a young man. He sees fire. What a brilliant display of God's power. You think anybody wants to mess with him? No. All right, so we so he says, I don't know why that when it says that the sound of their wings is like rushing waters. So just imagine in your mind that you hear this thing coming toward you. Okay? Besides the awesomeness of the color and the splendor that you have, fear is going to grip you because of the sound it makes. Because look. I mean, here he says, when the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings like the roar of rushing water, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, can you imagine? Uh, Amazing. All right, so let's start. Let's just take this. The word expanse or firmament that we use is the same word used in Genesis 1:6 to describe the creation of the heavens. Here it refers to some kind of platform above the living creature. So if it helps you understand this, think about you've got the wheels that will move it any way you want it to go. You've got the creatures that have straight legs, and have four faces, and have wings, and their wings are holding up this platform. Okay? Does that help your imagery any? Maybe, maybe not. All right, the sound of God's voice. Under the firmament, the movement of the living creatures produced an awesome noise that resembled the sound of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty. Parallel to that sound, the awesome voice itself came from above the firmament. The sound of God's voice was the same as John describing in his opening vision in Revelation 1:15, which also was a theophany. So the same way that Ezekiel described God's voice is the same way that John described God's voice in the Revelation. I'm glad God don't change, even when he just comes around. All right. Says his appearance being like fire is also described in other theophanies or God's. It says the striking elements of this vision have two important concepts. The first one is that Yahweh is a God of splendor and great power. Think about what Ezekiel is seeing here. It is full of splendor. It's very beautiful. I mean, when you think about a sapphire or a topaz on some of these, and then you think about this brilliantly shining like fire of a man, and even though we really can't envision these creatures, I can't help but think that they're beautiful because God created them. All right? So you have this beautiful, splendorous, is that a word? Most splendor throne. And if that's not enough, it sounds like rushing waters coming in. Powerful. 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 Second is the God of Israel is not bound to the land of Israel. An idea that seemed revolutionary for the Israelites at that time. Why? And let's think about that just a minute. Why would they relish so much the land that they came from? Why would that be so important to them? It was given to them by God. And when you think about all of the ways that God literally gave, I mean, when you think about Jericho and you think about the stories of how he delivered it into their hands and how, all the different miracles that God did and the ways that they were remembered, yes, it mattered. Because they thought, well, that's what God gave us, that's where he wants us to be. So therefore, if we're not there, then he's not going to listen to us and he can't do anything. Do you think that sometimes that same idea permeates churches today? Maybe not as much as before, as this, but yeah, there's some people believe that it can only happen at this church, it can only happen at this land, it can only happen at this location. God is not bound by that. He is not bound by that. Not bound by that. And it's important for us to realize this. Now, probably, if we were to dig deep into Ezekiel's mind, he was probably very fearful of death. I want to guess why. I mean, besides, you're seeing the throne of God. Besides that fact, why else might he be afraid to die? Yeah, he'd be afraid that he would die. Okay? What did he just see? Okay? Isaiah felt sinful. We'll get into that a little bit later. You've already said that he saw God or Jesus, right? Same. Did people back then believe you could see God and live? No. So there was probably some concern that he was about to die because he just saw God. I mean, I don't think it took Ezekiel very long to realize, whoa, this is not just a dream. I think he knew pretty rapidly that he was seeing God on his throne. And for most people, I mean, think about Moses. Did Moses ever see God? The back of him. And why did God say that? You remember? Why did God say that you can't see his face and live? Can't see his face and live. So, but Ezekiel's getting a strong vision of what God is and who God is and his power. Comment. Y'all got anything? Any thoughts? Yeah, me too. Yeah. You put humans in it and it's probably messed up. But yeah, I'd be interested to see the same thing. What would it look like? Yep. I, I don't know. I've heard some people say, and I'm going to go to Revelation for just a minute, that people think that when it talks about the horsemen, when it talks about all the different things, that it's talking about the armies of the day, and that could be true, but I don't know. So I'm kind of skeptical. I'm kind of skeptical to say one way or the other. You know, um, I think that he's. I think it's remarkable that what Ezekiel saw and what John saw have several similarities. They have several similarities. So I don't know if it. I don't know if it means the same thing. I would, you know, I don't know. Maybe that's just the best answer I can give. I don't know. Sometimes I think he does. I, and I may be wrong when I'm fixing to say. I'll admit that right up front. I think the fact that there's so many similarities between Ezekiel saw and what John saw, I don't think those are imagery. I think they're very literal. You know, there's difference in each of them. Don't misunderstand me. But there's also some strong similarities. You know, for I don't think Ezekiel says anything about rainbows here. Maybe he does. Did he? Okay, so so he does say something about rainbows. So there, there's but there's some similarities. I don't think God is speaking figuratively. I think He's being very literal. Like my opinion, okay, is that when we get to heaven, and if we were to describe it, we'd use the same thing. That's what I think. But I could be wrong. You know, me either. Me either. Me either. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's rich. Yeah, that's rich. All right. So Ezekiel saw the majesty of God who came to Ezekiel and the people in the crisis of the exile and reminded them of his holiness and power as Lord of his creation. Now, this is important for us to not lose sight of. As terrifying as this vision must have been, like I said, terrifying, it had a redemptive dimension. God uses and permits crisis circumstances to draw people to Him. And that's applicable every day. Whatever the situation, whatever the conflict, whatever it is, God is redemptive in every situation. And many times He shows His redemptive power through the crisis of our circumstance. Daily. All right. Everybody good? That's where I'm getting. Yep. Yep. And that's what we're going to let's just go there. Verse 28. Verse 28 says, like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the brightness all around it. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of. I want to read this right here because this is good too. Humanity in peril, that's what Sonia was talking about, needs a sense of the awesome majesty of God. There needs to be an awareness that God is greater than adversity. Amen. All right, it says, for this reason, the opening vision was crucial as the first revelation in the call of Ezekiel to be a prophet to the exiles. That's why it was so vivid, because he had to have Ezekiel's attention to know that he could do it. There's nothing that he couldn't do. All right, so it goes into a little bit of symbolism here. It says the cherubim as protectors of God's holiness were a reminder that humankind was sinful. Now, this kind of reflects back to Isaiah, like Al was talking about a minute ago, and we talked about it last week in chapter 6. I think it is whenever they call them seraphims there, but they're flying. Remember, it says with two wings they flew, with two they covered their face, with two they covered their feet. And they're saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord." And said Isaiah said, "Oh, I'm a sinful man." Conviction just in the presence of the Lord. And he said, "Who will go for us?" Or God says, "Who will go for us?" And he says, "Here am I. Send me." Then we kind of get that reminder. Yeah, we're sinful, but God can still use us. Amen. God can still use us. The only hope for humanity is to recognize God in the midst of the storms as one who can restore them to calm. Now, does being calm mean that everything's made right? No. No. Matter of fact, let's go to the back of the book. Does Ezekiel ever get out of bondage? Out of exile? Nope. He never does. Never does. But that's for later, right? That's for later. I gotta hurry. No, I don't think that's the case. I think the point is that we may be in bondage, but we've got to understand God's still bigger than whatever bondage. We may be here, but God's still bigger than any kind of bondage that we have. I think Paul understood that. I think when Paul was in bondage and when he was in and he I won't say he was complaining because he wasn't complaining, but he said several times, I'd rather be with you than be here. You know? So he had a desire to go out, but I think he understood that he was captive for a reason. I don't know that he understood that we would have 2/3 of the New Testament because he was in bondage, but he knew there was a reason that he was in bondage. So that's oh, yeah, right. Sure. And I think what I understand Barbara to be saying, and there's truth in that, is so many times when we are in bondage, we get we get caught in jail with the door sitting wide open. Does that make sense? Or the door's closed but it's unlocked. Right. Even though Paul was in bondage, Paul was on house arrest because he could go about. So Paul had lots of freedoms even in bondage, right? Ezekiel not so much. Ezekiel not so much. What we have to take and what we have to understand is even in the situation where we don't know the way out, even if we never get out, God is still God and He's still bigger. He's still bigger. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He's showing him, hey, look, I got this. Um, it says, like Isaiah in chapter 6, which we referred to, Ezekiel fell on his face in response to the awesome presence of God. Ezekiel, prostrate before God, must have wondered who could minister in such a place to such people. The answer came in the voice that relayed the details of his call. Three things. First, the vision was a reaffirmation of the nature of God as holy, powerful, and majestic. How many times have we already talked about that? It's important that it was important that Ezekiel be reminded of this. We got to remember that God is holy, powerful, and majestic. Second, the rainbow was a reminder of God's promise-making and promise-keeping character. And it was a rekindler of hope that God could and would help. Third, it was an assurance that nothing, including great geographic location, separated one from God. Through this vision, Ezekiel received a message of hope. People need a vision of hope, but such hope is always dependent on a willing response and a humble, repentant attitude. And that's easier said than done. Easier said than done. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. There will be a time. right. That is so true. No, but you said it good. All right. So I didn't get as far as I wanted to get, but it is 6:56. So that's the end of chapter 1 is a good place to stop. And I've enjoyed tonight. I've enjoyed tonight, and I've enjoyed the thoughts that y'all have. And please know, this is not about me just telling you what I read. Cause I've read and highlight and praying and asking God to give me what I need. Don't you hesitate to share if God puts something on your heart. Okay? Anybody got anything before we dismiss? Well, oh my goodness.